Hello, this is Chipicon, and this is the Changing Times, Changing Worlds, bringing you the Otherworldly Wednesday show, with speakers and topics to enlighten and enliven your night. We're going to and on and into the rest of the week, whatever. We hope to convince you to come to the conference this November, and I am Chipicon, your host, and this week our guest is Friend Honour Horne Jaruk, who will be speaking about silence and how the loss of silence impacts our energy. Thinking about it half an hour ago, as I was getting supper ready, I realized that I am not comfortable with silence. I'm comfortable with science, sure, but I am not comfortable with silence. If I am working alone in a room and there's nobody else in there with me to talk to, I will turn on the TV or the record player, or I will sing. But no, I'm not good at silence. Which to me means that I probably ought to be working on it. But Honor is a member of the Religious Society of Friends, otherwise known as Quakers. And so she's really good at silence. She's also really good at singing and other things that aren't silent, but that does indicate she has more control over it than I do. So let's see, as I'm going to repeat what we wrote. Ever since the first electrical generator, silence has been retreating from the world. Ever rising wave of subsonic and supersonic sounds, from vibratory thunder of dynamos to the shriek of fluorescent ballasts. Sounds that we don't know we're hearing and can affect our minds and bodies. And what is it doing to our spirits? And so I guess I will say that there is, in magic, there are many parts of magic, many spells or charms that require silence to make them work. So clearly silence can power and be used in energy work. But Honor, I want to know if you have other things that you think that would be useful for people to know.
Well, the main thing, other than what you've already said, is that I raised a son who is on the autistic spectrum, which opened my eyes for the first time to an entire world of influences on our attention, our energy, that most people never even realize exists. And a lot of what I want to talk about tonight is based on that knowledge that I gained raising an autistic child.
I understand the more we go in getting back to science, the more that we are, the more we learn, the more we find out that there's a huge range of sensitivity, and there are people out there who didn't know that people can't. There are people that aren't driven crazy by the sound of the ballasts, and that they don't hear many of the little noises that other people do hear. I, on the other hand, I am now going deaf and can't hear when the dryer or the washer pings or things like that. So,
which reminds me of something important. Since I am hoping that there will be people trying to talk to me, I should put my hearing aids in.
Yes, that's a good idea. I got to get those, but so far haven't been able to afford them. But
yeah, good ones.
My mother had them, and she also had a button that said, "I'm not deaf. I'm ignoring you." and yeah. When she wanted us to just leave her alone, she would ostentatiously take them out and put them on the table in front of her. It's like, I'm not dealing with you guys.
So, we have to start, if we're going to talk about silence and the retreat of silence from the world, with the world before electricity, because electricity is such a critical cutoff point. In the ancient world, before there were at least many water mills and windmills and other devices for turning natural energy into mechanical energy for human use, every sound that existed had a known and instantly identifiable cause. Every sound. So no matter what you were doing, no matter where you were, you knew what was influencing you. You could hear rocks in a stream shift as the water started flowing more quickly because of a storm upstream. And the storm could be 100 miles away, but you could tell it was there because of what it did to your local physical and sound environment. And then gradually, water mills and bucket lifts and windmills and many other methods of transforming natural energy to mechanical energy came into being. And those you had to learn about in order to integrate into your sound environment. If you did not know what a bucket loop sounded like, and you heard one, it was a threat until you had been around it, seen it working, not just heard it, long enough to connect each sound to each thing the mill was doing. You were trapped in an environment you could no longer fully understand and fully integrate, because something was happening that was not natural. Something was happening to your sound environment that was not reliable or predictable in the way that you know what wind means when it gets faster or when it switches direction. You can't do that with a water mill or a windmill unless you know that water mill, that windmill, and have seen it working and have learned what sounds mean what in connection to that device. So that was probably when the first autistic people, unquote, were recognized, because these were people who could not integrate these artificial sounds. I really think that the claim that autistic people don't hear you talk is an utter and complete lie. It's that they hear so much that your talking can't get through the other stuff they hear. We have put violent autistics, boys and girls, men and women who are literally uncontrollable, who physically harm themselves and other people, in what is called an anechoic chamber. This is an area specifically designed to prevent any propagated sound from returning to the ear, so that you cannot hear, except very briefly, clapping your hands, or, I mean, even slapping your ears. You can hear it when it happens, but there is no bounce back from any place. And they calm down and they become able to respond to any introduced sound, because it's only one introduced sound. For example, in an anechoic chamber, a teacher can sit next to an autistic child and hold up a book and say book, and the child will only hear the rustle of the teacher's clothing, their own heartbeat, and the word book. And with that little sound input, they can process what sound input they are getting. They can understand it and integrate it. And they will know that this particular type of collection of pieces of paper with words on them is a book. But anechoic chambers cost the earth. Right? It's something like $30,000 to build one the size of an average bathroom. You can make something close to an anechoic chamber relatively cheaply. But that close is an important distinction, because you have to be absolutely certain you know which outside sounds are the most dangerous to that particular individual, and build your chamber to eliminate those sounds. When electricity came in, it made all of this infinitely worse. Of course, when the water mills especially began powering large machinery like loom complexes and fulling mills, that made everything worse, because you now have loud and abnormal, outside the natural range sounds influencing your environment. For example, a large weaving mill, and even more so a large fulling mill, can produce subsonic vibrations. Most people can't hear them, but they can feel them, and the feel is not matching the sound that should accompanying it. So at some subliminal level, some level that is not within the conscious range of thought, they are being influenced by it. A fulling mill, bang, 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 like a drum, except not fast enough to sound like a drum, night and day for months on end, if they had enough fabric to keep it going. And that banging would shake the area around the mill. The ground vibrates. It comes up through the soles of your feet, and you can feel what should be a low sound, but you cannot hear the low sound because it's too low. You can hear the thumping, but your brain knows there's something beneath the thumping, even though you cannot process it. And that influences you. And then you have,
I'm sorry, it does sound an awful lot like people who go into a haunted house or energy dense environment, and they feel something, but they don't know what it is because they've never been trained to differentiate that type of thing.
yes, yeah, there are strong similarities. If you have not seen what causes all the sounds, you can't process them in the way you process natural sounds of a artifice-free environment, because you have no mental construct to connect the sound to an action and therefore file the sound neatly in, oh, this is happening and that's why what that sound is caused by. Now, the people who worked in the fulling mill, although those subsonic vibrations were making them deaf, but they could see what was causing those vibrations. They could see the hammers rising up and down, hitting the cloth as the rollers turned it, and therefore it did not have the same effect on them. Because the critical factor is, can you integrate it into your soundscape? If you can, and it is not otherwise dangerous, as the fulling mill was because of the sheer level of sound, but if you can integrate it into your soundscape, then it's not going to influence you in any obvious adverse way. But you get a fulling mill, and half a mile upstream, you get a little carding mill that's producing carded wool for the spinners to spin. And then maybe half a mile downstream, they put in a spinnery, a weavery, and all of those are making different sounds. And they are loud enough that some of that sound is reaching you where you stand next to the fulling mill. So now you have three sources of unnatural sounds that you cannot picture the cause of, cannot integrate into your soundscape, that are all influencing your brain's ability to process information.
I had a thought, maybe this had something to do with certain men just saying, I can't deal with civilization, and becoming mountain men and going off into the wilderness.
Very much.
Rather be in the wilderness, deal with civilization, which was inexplicably uncomfortable.
Yes, very much so. When we have tested modern mountain men who have been caught in federal forests, national parks, etc., living in a way that was a detriment to the park, and therefore they had to be removed. They have done psychiatric analysis on them, and they have consistently found not necessarily autism, but autism type tendencies. A tendency to be unable to cope with some kinds of input, or to cope abnormally with some kinds of input. And sound and vibration are two of the common ones they have trouble with.
But sensation, I'm also familiar with autism, and sensitivity to sound is very common.
Yeah.
So.
And yet there are deaf autistics, so it's not solely sound.
But I remember them spending most of the period trying to drag my son into the gym, which of course echoed horribly.
Yeah.
And he spent music classes under his seat with his hands over his ears. Why did it take us 4 years to figure that out? It's like, thank goodness that somebody did sometime.
Yeah. A factor in the beginning of electricity, though, was a sea change, even compared to what had already happened, because electricity is produced by vibration. Electricity is the result of the manipulation of electrons. So now it is not only affecting your body in the sense of vibrations, both subsonic and supersonic, that you can feel but not hear, but also it is affecting your non-physical self, because electrons are being moved around in a way that your body was never designed to understand or handle, and it is directly impinging on your own energy field. So you have the subsonic sound of the big dynamos, which can carry for miles, just as some of an elephant's calls do. And you not only have, later on, the ballast of a fluorescent light creating that somewhere above a mosquito whine that so many autistic children cannot tolerate, and so many kids who don't actually hear it and know they hear it still can't tolerate. But you also have electrical fields. Most people know that there are people who cannot wear an electrical based watch, because it will just, a watch with a battery just doesn't work on them. It keeps stopping. And then they get another battery and the watch doesn't go anyway. That is a result of something odd about the natural energy fields of that person's body. We don't know what yet, at least not for sure. But we know that it's an actual thing that really happens.
Yeah, we know that one.
Yeah, and it's like you have said so many times, we are past the is psychic energy possible to, yeah, of course it's possible and it happens all the time, but how does it work and how do we make it work better?
Yeah.
Well, can electrical fields interfere with human electrical fields? Yes. This is a very depressing story, but it is my classic example. Many years ago, a bunch of medical students got a little drunk, and they decided that the Jell-O from the hospital cafeteria was so bad that it might be sentient.
Oh dear.
So they decided to hook it up to a EEG machine. And because they were very slightly drunk, they decided to add a heart monitor and all the other things that you plug into a patient to see if they could see if it was producing brain waves, what was influencing it to produce brain waves. They found out that when you hook all of these machines up to a bowl of Jell-O, aside from the heartbeat, you get many of the same readings that you do when they're hooked up to a profoundly comatose human being.
And did they decide what that meant?
Well, they were not allowed to tell what they had decided it meant, which was that many profoundly comatose human beings that had to be on a stomach tube, etc., because they no longer had any reflexes except breathing and heartbeat. In some cases, not even breathing. In fact, had no brainwave, because the EEG was showing a brainwave on a bowl of Jell-O. A brainwave that was apparently caused by the other machines necessary to keep a profoundly comatose human being alive.
Oh. Interesting.
Now, it was a really weird brainwave, but it was a consistently weird brainwave across many profoundly comatose people. And their conclusion was that they weren't getting a brainwave, they were getting all these machines emitting energy wave.
Makes sense.
But as I said, not allowed to publish
what came of that?
Hmm?
I would say, so what came of that?
Absolutely nothing. They weren't allowed to publish those findings. I only happen to know about them because in my early college years, I was in Boston a lot and interacting with a lot of students from the major Boston colleges and universities. And I had a 6-hour-long talk with a guy who was a medical student at one of the universities. And he had made friends with one of the young supervisors of the medical school's interns, who had once been one of the drunk college students who pulled this off, and repeated it when stone cold sober dozens of times for all their professors and got nowhere.
Oh, you mean it didn't happen again?
Oh, no, it did. It happened every time the medical students did it. Jell-O showed the same brain waves as a profoundly comatose patient.
Did other things? Did anything else? Did they try it on different substances like macaroni?
Well, that he never mentioned. I don't know.
That's science. That's what you got to do.
Yeah. I think that it would work better on Jell-O simply because Jell-O is naturally conductive, and I have no idea if macaroni is. But even though they proved to the doctors that their teachers that this was a consistent phenomena, the teachers said, no, you are not going to publish it. You are not going to tell anybody about it. You are not going to do anything about it.
It will embarrass our university and our funding.
No, what they said was that people would use it as an excuse to murder comatose people.
And they're right.
So, but specifically in terms of the death of silence, or at least the retreat of silence, is that because electricity makes noise in and of itself, it makes noise. There are vibrations on the sonic spectrum associated with electricity just going through a wire. It's not doing anything else. It's just going through a wire, and there's a sound to that. And it affects energy fields. There is a program in the US, in several states, where flocks of sheep, in some cases flocks of goat because of the native herbal plant life, are herded under high tension wires to eat down all the vegetation under the wires and keep the path clear to try and reduce the fire risk.
Good idea.
But of course, if you have sheep or goats, you have shepherds or goat herds.
Yeah.
And over the years that this has been going on, which is since at least the late 80s and maybe earlier, the shepherds who herd these sheep or goats under the high tension wires, and they just keep going all year long until the snow gets too deep for the sheep to find anything to eat, and even the goats are mad about it. Mm-hmm. their sperm count goes down.
Oh,
It not only goes down directly, but they produce far more deformed sperm that cannot effectively travel to inseminate anybody, that won't make the race. Because the little swimmers don't swim right. And many of those shepherds have been reporting for years, hearing the wires. Not wind through the wires, which is what they're always told it is, but the wires.
mm-hmm.
Some of them could tell when the dynamos had upped production. For example, in the summer in the South, when people wake up and turn their air conditioning to a higher setting or a better setting, the dynamos have to increase production of electricity, and there's more electricity running through the wires. They could hear it. And everybody and their Aunt Matilda told them they could not, that they were hallucinating. But it turned out when it was tested that they could tell, whether they heard it or not, they could tell when the load going through the wires increased and decreased. And you can call it hearing or you can call it feeling, but if they are perceiving it, it's real. It's valid. And oh, by the way, they eventually went to what are called ewe and wether flocks for this work, because ewes that had a ram with them would regularly abort and had a far higher percentage of deformed offspring than they did when they were kept away from the high tension lines for 2 years or more.
Yeah. But I keep remembering the new stories that come out these days that about how they're discovering people can perceive things that they did not know. That people aren't supposed to be. They're seeing colors and frequencies beyond the normal. They're hearing things that in frequency ranges beyond. Oh, come on, guys, we're all different. We have a range of abilities. This is, I don't know why it's so surprising every single time, but they keep hearing it and they keep saying, well, that explains that.
Yes. But the critical question now is, what effect is this having on us and on our society and on our culture? Right now, from birth, over 99% of all Americans hear a refrigerator turning on and off all day, every day. It is not a natural sound. It has no connection to anything that is identifiable to the child or adult as part of the natural world. And yet it is there in the background of our lives. And there's no escaping it, except by going someplace where there are no refrigerators, and then you've got warm food. And then there's a dishwasher. And then there's a separate freezer. And then there's a furnace. And then there's an air conditioner. And then there's an electric stove with an oven cycling on and off, or a gas stove with the sparker lighting the oven and lighting the burners as they go on and off. And all of these are additional layer of unnatural sound.
And don't forget those fluorescent light bulbs.
And then there's this fluorescent light bulbs with the ballast that shrieks a little bit above the sound frequency of a mosquito, just high enough above it that most people can't hear it. But people with very good hearing or very good brain processing of sound can, and it's horrible. It's just plain horrible. And then the teacher says, Why do you keep going and standing by the doorway? You've got to sit in your seat right under the big triple bank of fluorescent lights. He's standing in the doorway to get away from the noise. And since the teacher can't hear it, the teacher does not accept that explanation of what's going on.
Yes. Those who cannot hear the music think those who are dancing are mad. I forget who said that.
Yes.
It's very frustrating when they don't believe you when you can do something.
And the latest level of that is the cell phones. No 4G, 5G, whatever technology is not giving you COVID. Please, people, there's this thing called science. It's great fun. What?
I hadn't heard that one.
Oh God, yeah.
No, the one I heard was that cell phones have been, now this is not proven because of course people don't believe in the basic thing, but there is a correlation that some investigators have made that in places of high cell phone use, ghost sightings go down and go, pretty much stop within a few years of a tower going up. So apparently there's something about the energy of cell tower, whatever is going between the phones and the towers dissipates the residual energy that creates many ghost-like phenomena. Don't know what that means, but it's one of the things that paranormal investigators have found. So yeah, there's things that are out there that we are not aware of yet. So
yeah, there is a large area in the southeast, maybe Virginia, but I'm not sure I'm remembering this correctly, but it's in the southern end of the east side of the United States of America. There's a large area where there is a radio telescope. And in order for the radio telescope to work, they have to keep anything that produces a frequency near the radio frequencies out. So there's this very large area, like 2 or 3 towns worth, where you are not supposed to have a cell phone, you are not supposed to have a router, you are not supposed to have anything that has an electromagnetic spectrum signal that carries. And as a result of that, there are over 1,000 people, last I heard, which was a while ago, who have moved to that area specifically because those things are forbidden. And when they are in areas where those things are not forbidden, they get sick. There are people who have been bedridden for years who moved to that electromagnetic spectrum silence area and recovered completely as if they had never been ill. In fact, the suppression of electromagnetic spectrum noise is so important that they actually have trucks going around listening for it, unquote, and walking up to people's doors and saying, okay, give me the router. Now, mind you, a router that just plugs into a cable and plugs into your computer is fine. But one that's a Wi-Fi router, no, not allowed there. And it has made an immense difference for a lot of people that were chronically ill and were told it was hopeless and they were just going to die.
The implications can be expanded.
Give me a for instance.
Well, I'm just thinking about, where we are, I'm thinking of, in Changing Times, Changing Worlds community, how many of the situations, the labs where they test psychics and what they can do in the field they can't do in the lab, how much may be interference static from from the gadgets in the lab. I've often, when they talked about, well, you can't prove it, it's like, okay, fine, here is a radio, you'd say music comes out of this radio, and you're like, well, yeah, it does. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not hearing anything. Well, you've got to turn it on. Okay, turn it on, click. I'm still not hearing anything. You didn't plug it in. Well, you didn't say you had to plug it in. Okay, it needs a power source. Fine, okay, you plug it in. No, I'm not hearing music. There's this kind of buzzing sound. It's like, well, you haven't tuned it. Okay, fine, we'll tune it. It's like, well, I can't understand any of that. That's because you've got it tuned to the foreign language station. Oh, okay. So basically, this is, in my view, how a lot of psychic investigators or debunkers work. It's because they're not taking the complexity. You need to have your power source. You need to have the tuning. You have to have the channel in which it has to be directed properly. It has to be in a language that everybody involved understands. Oh yes, and the final thing is, fine, and then turn on a blender and suddenly it's all static again. Because I am convinced that some of these debunkers generate static internally.
It's perfectly possible. After all, if they can make an electric watch stop, why can't they influence other energy fields?
Indeed.
And I'm not saying that all psychic debunkers make electric watches stop. I'm just using those as two examples of natural bodily energy fields influencing the world around them.
A lot of powerful psychic people can't wear watches because they just have too much of whatever that energy is. So, who knows? I was kind of hoping some of them would be on here and we could talk about it, but apparently silence is not as appealing a topic. The people will find it again.
Well,
I would like you to comment on, I have, in 60 years of, or 50 some years of playing with energy, I have finally learned to be able to detect it, which I have not always been able to do. But I now can feel energy moving. And if you have been in say a Wiccan circle and felt the energy rise as they make a cone of power, if you go to a church, you can feel the power be coming down from the altar and hitting the congregation, rising up from the congregation, circling back to the altar. When I went to a Quaker meeting, it was like fog seeping out of the ground in the spring when the energy just comes out of everybody and sits there. There's no motion in my experience. And I figure you're more experienced, but have you noticed the energy use differences in a meeting of the Friends? Because you're not directing the energy, but it does rise anyway.
Picture a bowl. I'm gonna see if I can make this motion visible to the camera. Picture a bowl.
I see your hands.
Okay, there. And it has a flared edge. So it's like this, it comes up and then it flares out at the edge to not quite, but almost flat. Okay? Mm-hmm. The way a Quaker meeting works, when it works the way it's supposed to work. As everybody comes into the meeting and sits down and centers down, and centering down is critically important. If you cannot cut out the surface chatter of your brain and dip down into the bottom level where you are being aware and not active, it's not going to work. But when you can do that, each person becomes a dot on the flared edge of the bowl, all the way around the whole bowl, okay? And when enough people have centered down, something taps the bowl, and all those drops on the edge run down into the middle. And when that happens, if it happens, the most profound spiritual energy becomes present in that pool of water. And out of it will rise amazing insights that these people are not capable of in their regular daily life. And some of those insights will form a spoken message. Many will not. There are many profoundly gathered meetings, centered meetings, where no one speaks a word out loud. That doesn't mean that the energy is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. But at the end of the meeting, something takes a glass of water, a dropper or whatever, and puts droplets of water all around the edge, back where they were when the meeting started. But every single one of those drops is changed. That's what a Quaker meeting that is working the way we want it to work does.
That sounds like a very highly powerful, magical working that takes a certain amount of training for the participants.
Very much so. There is a joke about what are called popcorn meetings. A popcorn meeting is a meeting where a lot of people are speaking, but they are not speaking from the silence. They're speaking from the chatter in their brain. And the joke is how can you tell it's going to be a popcorn meeting? Well, the first person to speak up says, I was listening to NPR this morning. And they're talking about mundanities. An example of what a gathered meeting, a centered group of people can do. My first Quaker meeting in Japan, I'd been to several meetings in the US before. I'd been to several meetings in the US before, but this was my first one at Tokyo Monthly meeting in Japan. And I was sitting there going, oh God, let this go well, please. Don't let me offend anybody. Because after all, I'm an American servicewoman in a Japanese meeting, and the only Japanese I speak is Wakata nai nihongo wa, which means I do not speak or understand your language. So I'm just praying, help me do the right thing, help me be the right thing for this place, for this time. And that's the only thought in my head. So all the surface chatter is gone. It's just been wiped away. I am concentrating solely on trying to make it work. And then a gentleman stood up and started talking in Japanese because, it's a Japanese meeting and people do that. And he was very upset. And I am on the autism spectrum myself. If I can tell that someone is very upset, they are very, very, very upset. And he spoke for several minutes in Japanese and then sat down. And I'm sitting there going, God, this guy's got a problem. Somebody help him. You can tell somebody to help him, please. And I am not joking. I am not exaggerating. Something grabbed the back of my collar and the back of my belt and went, up with you. And I was standing and speaking. I have no idea what I said. I didn't have any idea what I said after I sat down that day. But when I sat down, I'm going, oh God, why did I do that? That was incredibly stupid. No one will even understand what I said. I shouldn't say. And then a gentleman stood up and started talking in Japanese. And I'm, thank God, they're ignoring me. This is good. And he eventually sat down too. No one else spoke. And when the meeting ended, we all stand up, and I'm standing there going, just please ignore me. I'm a weird gaijin who has no idea what any of you are saying. And the guy who spoke after me came to me with a little tiny, twisted up, very elderly Quaker lady, Japanese Quaker lady. I don't know what it is with me and elderly Quakers with arthritis. There's a connection of some kind there. But this lady was holding on to the gentleman's arm, and he said to me, Oba-san wants to know why you didn't tell us you spoke Japanese. And I said, I don't speak Japanese. Wakata nai nihongo wa. There, that's it. That's all I know. And he said, well, then how did you answer the previous speaker's needs so perfectly? All I did was translate what you said. I didn't have to change a single syllable. And I looked him in the eye and said, God knows. And that was the moment that made me a Quaker. Because if I can speak to another person's need when I am not even able to comprehend their need because it's the wrong language, something that is not me is giving me that message.
A real example is speaking in tongues.
I'm not sure speaking in tongues to me, as I've seen it done by Pentecostals when I've gone to Pentecostal services, involves speaking in words that nobody understands. Supposedly the language of angels. Got me. Huh?
Babbling, but
yeah.
But in the early stories of the Christians, when they were speaking in tongues, they were speaking so that everybody in a cosmopolitan situation heard them in their own language. So they may have been babbling, but they were it was being translated.
Yeah.
I think that is where you have to get before it's really speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
And that's what it sounded like your experience sounded like. So
yeah.
Anyway, but back to silence. Just freaking shutting up has power.
Yes. I make a joke with people that spinning is exactly identical to meditation, except that with spinning, you end up with yarn. But there is no other difference that I can find. It is the exact same process of the chatter quieting down and going away, and you're stepping into an alternate zone of consciousness where your body is doing something in a different way and in a different brain function than you do in your everyday life. And as a result of that, you cease to be jumping out of your body in the way that many autistic people say that they do constantly, because you are completely in your body and you're completely in your hands and your arms and your eyes and the thread and the yarn and the twist and the pull and nothing else. That's all that remains in your brain, all that you are paying attention to, and everything else falls away. I have known at least one woodworker who described using a draw shave, a very primitive ancestor plane, having the exact same effect on him. He became hands and eyes and the tool and the wood, and there was nothing else left. I am told it also happens for many artists and for many weavers, but I have never experienced it in those contexts. For me,
I think I may have. I might have with the art, because you lose all touch with time. and other aspects of reality.
Yeah. You look up and you are ravenous and you can't see the thread clearly anymore, but the last 10 yards are just as smooth as the first 10 yards when it was noon and the light was blazing. Yeah.
Okay, what happened to the rest of the day?
Yeah. Oh, I've got 7 bobbins of yarn standing on the floor next to my spinning wheel. That's what happened to the rest of the day. Got it.
That may have a source that might have be a source of the Rapunzel legend. I'm wondering.
The Rapunzel legend, where she's in the tower and she lets down her hair? Or are you thinking of
Oh, I'm
different
sorry,
one?
not Rapunzel. I was thinking of the Rumpelstiltskin. Said
Yeah.
the wrong name. The wrong name. The Rumpelstiltskin, where the magical spinning does stuff. But
Yeah.
Turn straw into gold.
yeah,
Well,
this is
that is,
my,
of course, from a spinner's point of view, the Rumpelstiltskin story is based on something real, which was that spinsters who could produce linen thread finer than a certain diameter were put in royal service. And their family had no say in the matter whatsoever, except they got half of whatever the girl was paid. Because spinning that fine requires something normal people just don't have. It's not exactly a sense of touch, but that's part of it. And that happened in India with the Dhaka muslin, made from a special breed of cotton that has now gone extinct because the English deliberately burned it all. The women who produced the finest of the Dhaka muslins were similarly in royal service, or at least a noble's service. They were not working for themselves, ever. And so the Rumpelstiltskin story, no, she's not going to marry the prince if she manages to spin this linen thread so fine that when the sunlight hits it, it looks like gold wire. But she is going to work for the king, the prince, and be cared for in a far better manner than her family could ever hope to provide for her, because of this very unusual skill. And the skill involves being able to fall back into your body and have the world around you disappear, while everything you do and everything you are becomes a connection to the thread. And that is energy working on a fantastic level.
it is so, it is energy working. And the thing is that I connect things. I am a generalist. I don't specialize in anything. I like knowing as much as I can about science and history and literature and whatever, because it allows me to make lots of connections. And when I, the things that I learn about, do some silence in, silence in medicine and silence in magic and silence in folklore. These things are all that they make it. Trying to connect them, I hope, makes connections that may be useful. But
Yeah.
I know the time, which I have to occasionally check. Do you have, unlike many authors, do you have any things that you'd like to promote or mention so that other people would, something you find that might be useful to the rest of the people in the community?
Yes. If you live in a big enough city, it is possible to rent noise canceling headphones, which can be set to eliminate very nearly all of the frequencies that are within the possible maximum range of human hearing. Now, the deep subsonics and the really high supersonics, you cannot eliminate, but then again, those are not as likely to be a bad thing for you. It's the ones that are right at the edges that are the most likely to be a bad thing. And right at the edges, noise canceling headphones can filter out. I think everybody should try those at least once for an entire day and see how different their physical and mental energy is when all the machinery, all of the traffic, all of the jets, all of the refrigerator are gone. Because there is an obvious and glaring difference, even for people who think it doesn't bother them in the least. I cannot recommend this too highly. If you live in a small town, of course, it's going to be very difficult for you to rent noise canceling headphones. But if you have ever had any suspicion that noise bothers you, it might be worth buying a cheap set first. And if they do help, then get the best set you can find, the ones that are used for schools that specifically concentrate on educating autistic people.
Oh, yeah,
They
and,
won't be cheap, by the way.
from the chat, I'm going to mention Angela has recommended the book Quiet. It is non-magical, but Quiet by Susan Cain. She has a link, but I can't read a computer link out. I'm copying it, so if anybody wants it, they can get in touch with me on Facebook.
Put it
And
on the
regarding
page.
the DACA muslin, there's a wonderful a link for DACA muslin.
Yeah. But when it gets on YouTube, put that in your comments under the
comments.
picture.
Yeah, because yeah, silence can be powerful. I have a friend who was in prison once, and prison is one of those places where they can, like college, where you can get college students to take tests for $5 a head or something. But for if you participate, you get this days off your sentence or something. And it was like that movie where Donald Sutherland turned into a werewolf or something like that. It was a complete sensation, stopping the pool with it. You get no hearing and no seeing and unfortunately, everyone who participated in that, except my friend who told me about it, and a Native American shaman, went irreversibly insane and just were shipped off to the crazy house, because human beings aren't meant to spend more than 2 days with no sensations. He hadn't had the training that the shaman did, but he had been beaten up by prison guards often enough so that if he began to lose it, all he had to do was move and the pain would bring him back into his body, and then he would be able to get by. But
Yeah.
It's a sad and weird story. No, we are not meant to be without sensation while we are still wearing bodies. But
Although brief, note that I said brief, under an hour at the absolute maximum, use of those tanks can be very helpful for some people with autism.
like fasting, intermittent fasting can be good for people's digestive systems. But you got to be careful. But we are now at the end of the time, and I want to thank you. It's an unusual it's been an unusual workshop or class, but I think it's important because there's a lot of implications. There's things that we can take away from this that we don't, that I think do bear on the energy work we do in this community. I especially like the description of how the energy works in the Quaker meeting. The image that came to my mind was of a tuning fork. And when you strike a tuning fork, or if you do one guitar string, the strings near it start to vibrate. I think I think that that's why it might be easier in the group than it is just to do it living at home if you can't. As I'm sure that must be what friends have been doing during the pandemic. But you probably won't get that complimentary vibrations.
Not as much, no. It is very hard over a Zoom meeting to get the meeting as a whole together. But if the individual people are centered, if they have done the preparatory work to center down and to fall into themselves and out of the surrounding world, there is still that, what we call that still small voice that we cannot hear when we're busy with our daily lives, or at least cannot hear well enough for it to do us much good, that will speak to our condition, that will talk to us about whatever it is we need to fix and whatever it is we need to pay attention to and whatever it is we need to start ignoring. And the other people in the meeting, when we talk about what that centering has revealed to us, it may be of use to some of them, but you can't tell that it will be of use to them in the same way that you can when a meeting is together physically.
Mm. Well, I guess we have now reached our hour, and I should say goodbye to everybody. I remind you that this is going to be being put on the Changing Times, Changing Worlds YouTube channel. Also, I'm going to announce that Facebook changed the way it's doing things, and we are now, the Facebook group is now it is now private, so that people don't have to be afraid of participating in discussions in the Facebook group, which apparently Facebook changed something so anybody could see what we were saying. So now all announcements are going to be made on the Facebook page, Changing Times, Changing Worlds page, and the Changing Times, Changing World group, which you have to get vetted and invited to come into, is going to be private, so that we should have our privacy for that. But the conference is going to be in November on, I know I have it here, November 8th to 14th, with evening classes and panels Monday through Friday, and all day long on the weekends with some breakout rooms. So thank you for coming. Please we're looking forward to you coming again next week. I've got Rod Cox coming up. What is, trying to see if I could see the upcoming Changing Times, Changing Worlds shows. Yes. J. Michael Clark is going to be talking next week on tableau readings, where you put the whole freaking deck, or sometimes more than one deck out. You need a big floor for that. Ed Hubbard on the 14th will be talking about the Parliament of World Religions, which is going to be virtual this year. So this year I'm going to get to go. And Ron Cox is going to be talking about Runewalder on the 21st. Kat Deering, the Oracle, is telling us about the Oracle, the Seelie and the Unseelie Fae. So we're do let anybody that you think has something cool to know about. Let me know about them. Let them know about us. And thank you again for coming. Thank you, Honor, for telling us about this. This is something new to talk about. And so that's it. Thanks.